At 7:15 in the morning, the CEO's son called me and said, "With that attitude, don't bother coming in." His voice was too loud, too deliberate, as if he wanted someone else to hear him being decisive. Then he tried to mute the phone, but failed, and I heard him whisper to someone beside him, "Just scare this stubborn old lady. She'll back off." Stubborn old lady. That was how my 12 years of work were being summarized. I sat there on the edge of my bed, holding the phone a few inches from my ear. My name is Rachel Whitmore, and I had been running the operational backbone of Whitmore Automotive in Austin for more than a decade. I trained half the managers. I built the vendor structure. I cleaned up the messes this same young man once created. I should have yelled. I should have defended myself. Instead, I breathed in slowly and said, "All right, good luck." Then I ended the call before he could say anything else. For a moment, the silence pressed against my chest. I felt the sting of humiliation, the anger trying to break through, the disbelief that someone half my age, someone I used to fix problems for, thought he could frighten me into obedience. I did not crumble. I did not cry. I just stared at the phone and let the words settle. And then, 4 hours later, at 11:47 in the morning, I signed a contract as Chief Operating Officer for Rivas Auto Group, the largest competitor in the Austin region. My hand didn't shake when I put my name on the line. Their executive team sat across the table watching me as if they already knew how the day had started for me. When the pen clicked shut, a strange calm filled my body. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. What happened between 7:15 and 11:47 was not an accident. It was a reveal of who they were, and of who I had always been. I closed the folder, stood up, and prepared to explain how the morning had truly begun. I drove to the dealership anyway. After 12 years building its operations from the ground up, I refused to let a 7:15 phone call dictate whether I showed up. I walked through the side entrance, past the service hallway I used to reorganize myself, and straight toward the conference room. No one greeted me. No one even looked up. That alone told me everything was about to shift. Inside, the CEO's son, Brandon, sat at the head of the table like he had earned the seat. To his right was Mara from Human Resources, a woman who used to ask me for help with quarterly reports. To his left sat a man I had only seen twice before their attorney, poised with a thin folder as if the decision had been made long before I arrived. Brandon didn't offer a hello. He just tapped the chair across from him. "Sit. We need to address some concerns." I kept my face calm. "Concerns that came up before or after your call this morning." Mara cut in quickly, her voice stiff. "Rachel, we've received feedback that your leadership style has become rigid." Rigid, I repeated, more out of disbelief than anger. The attorney slid the folder forward. "There are additional notes about negative behavior, dismissive tone, and undermining innovation." Brandon leaned back, arms crossed. "This place moves fast. We need people who adapt. People who aren't stuck in old patterns. Old patterns." The phrase hung between us. A slicker version of stubborn old lady. I looked directly at him. So now protecting the company from reckless decisions is being labeled negative. He shrugged. "The team feels constrained. You shut ideas down. You slow progress. You don't move at modern speed." Modern speed. Another polite insult meant to sound professional. I glanced at the attorney's folder, already prepared, already waiting for a signature. This wasn't feedback. This wasn't a conversation. This was a performance staged for a conclusion they had already written. Their desperation to paint me as the problem was suddenly louder than any accusation in the room. I folded my hands on the table and kept my voice steady. "If you're accusing me of something, then name it. Give me one concrete example." Mara shifted uncomfortably. "Rachel, the feedback is confidential." "Convenient." I said, "So I'm supposed to defend myself against ghosts." The attorney cleared his throat, trying to play mediator. This is simply the collective sentiment. No. I cut in. This is the aftermath of last week's meeting, when I refused to sign off on Brandon's expansion plan. Brandon's jaw tightened. For the first time that morning, the veneer slipped. I leaned forward. You pitched opening 3 new locations with no demographic research, no vendor support, and no financial modeling. You wanted it approved because your father was watching and you needed a win. Mara's eyes darted toward him. Surprised? Brandon snapped. You killed momentum. Rachel. There it is, I said quietly. The real reason. You embarrassed me in front of the board, he fired back. You talk like you know better than everyone. I talked like someone who has spent 12 years protecting the company from decisions that cost money instead of making it. I kept my gaze locked on him. I told the truth because it was the responsible thing to do. He scoffed. Responsible? You stalled innovation. Brandon, I said, your plan would have burned through over $2 million before the first door even opened, and you know it. His face flushed. You never support my ideas. You bring ideas, I replied, but not structure, not data, not risk assessments. And when someone asks for those things, you call it negativity. Mara tried again, her voice thin. We are simply responding to team concerns. No, I said. You are responding to his pride. Silence landed hard. Even the attorney looked away for a moment. Brandon leaned forward, eyes cold. We can't grow with someone who refuses to get on board. I let the words settle. The firing wasn't about leadership, or tone, or attitude. It was about ego his, and how dangerous it felt to him when someone older, steadier, and unafraid to challenge him refused to play along. The attorney finally opened the thin folder. Rachel, the company is willing to offer 4 weeks of severance. In exchange, he tapped the final page. You agree to a non-disclosure clause. No public statements. No discussions with vendors or staff. No mention of internal decisions. 4 weeks? After 12 years. Mara slid a pen toward me. This is a fair offer. It allows everyone to move on cleanly. I pushed the pen back. I'm not signing anything I haven't reviewed with my attorney. Brandon clicked his tongue. Rachel, this doesn't need to turn into a spectacle. Just sign, take the package, and go. We are trying to give you a dignified exit. A dignified exit, I repeated. Is that what you call firing someone and blaming it on their attitude? His expression hardened. If you walk out without signing, the offer expires today. That's fine, I said. I'll survive without 4 weeks of hush money. Mara blinked. This is the standard process. No, I said quietly. This is your process for people you think will panic. Brandon leaned back, folding his arms like a final verdict had been delivered. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stood, gathering the folder. Hard things don't scare me. Brandon, shortcuts do. He muttered something under his breath, something about older employees never knowing when to step aside, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. I walked out of the conference room with each step heavier than the last. The moment the door closed behind me, the adrenaline drained, leaving a thin ache under my ribs. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles stiffened, forcing myself to breathe. 12 years of loyalty. 12 years of late nights, last-minute crises, and saving them from mistakes they never admitted making. And the minute I stood between Brandon and his ego, I became disposable. I let the folder rest on the passenger seat. The betrayal hurt deeper than I wanted to admit. But the pain did not break me. It sharpened something instead, something steady and unwilling to bow. They expected fear. What they got was resolve. I sat in the driver's seat with the folder still beside me, my pulse thudding in my ears. The anger had settled into something sharper fear, maybe, or the realization that nothing about the last 12 years meant a thing to them. I unlocked my phone and opened my contacts. Dozens of familiar names stared back at me. People I had coached, people I had defended, people who had promised they always had my back. My thumb hovered over one name, then another, but I couldn't bring myself to press call. I did not want pity. I did not want to explain myself to anyone who had already chosen silence. I scrolled lower until I landed on a name I had never once needed professionally: Marco Rivas. Marco owned Rivas Auto Group, the biggest rival in the Austin market. Every vendor event, every industry summit, he had spoken to me with a respect I never once had to earn. Once. A vendor joked that Marco studied my systems because they were the cleanest in Central Texas. I had laughed it off, but I had never forgotten it. I stared at his name for a long moment before typing exactly 6 words. They fired me. Total setup. Rachel. I didn't expect an immediate response. I just needed someone who understood operations. Someone outside the Whitmore bubble. Someone who wouldn't tell me to calm down or take a week off. My phone pinged almost instantly. Come by now. 2 words. No questions. No hesitation. I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I started the engine before doubt could claw its way back in. I didn't know if this was smart. I didn't know if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I only knew one thing: staying silent would let Brandon rewrite the story, and I was done letting him decide who I was. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the fear didn't disappear, but it shifted. It made room for something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Movement, direction. A door opening just as another slammed shut behind me. Marco met me the moment I stepped into his office. No small talk, no forced smile, just a steady look that told me he already sensed something was wrong. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. The 7:15 phone call. The words, "stubborn old lady." The fake accusations. The rushed folder. The 4-week severance tied to a gag order. Brandon's crack in his voice when he said I killed momentum. The way 12 years had been erased in 10 minutes. Marco didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and shook his head. They actually did it. They really let you go. They wanted me silent. I said. The NDA made that clear. He leaned back, eyes narrowing with a kind of amused disbelief. Rachel, this is a gift. To me, not to them. I blinked. A gift. I have been trying to recruit you for 2 years, he said plainly. Vendors told me your systems were the only thing keeping Whitmore Automotive from collapsing into chaos. But you were loyal, and I respected that. He tapped his desk once. They threw away the one person holding their infrastructure together. His certainty startled me. Marco, I just lost my job an hour ago, and I am offering you a better one right now. I stared at him. Doing what? Running everything, he said. Chief Operating Officer, full autonomy. You manage strategy, inventory flow, vendor chains your way. No forced innovation, no ageist nonsense, no sons playing boss. My breath caught. That is not a small role. No, he agreed. It is the right one. He slid a contract forward, simple, direct, no trap hidden between the lines. If you want it, sign. I looked at the clock on his wall. 11:47 in the morning. 4 hours after being told not to come in. 4 hours after being called old, rigid, and replaceable. My hand didn't shake as I signed my name. Relief didn't crash over me. It settled quiet, controlled, firm. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift under me, not against me. I wasn't trapped under small minds anymore. I wasn't begging to be understood. I was stepping into a position built for someone who knew what she was doing. My new keycard had barely cooled in my hand when the first call came in. It was Decker, one of the highest volume import vendors in Central Texas. He didn't bother with a greeting. Rachel, tell me where you are now. Rivas Auto Group, I said. Good, he answered. I am terminating with Whitmore by the end of the day. Decker. You do not have to, I do. He cut in. I worked with you. Not them. The call ended without ceremony. 10 minutes later, another vendor called. Then another. By early afternoon, 3 clients who used to demand my attention at Whitmore had emailed Marco directly, saying they wanted their next purchases processed through me. One of them ordered a fleet renewal every year. Another spent over $200,000 annually on high-end models. Marco stepped into my doorway, eyebrows raised. Do you know you have an entire vendor chain calling my front desk asking if you're really here? I didn't ask them to. I said, I know. He replied, that is what makes it so valuable. By late afternoon, I heard a knock on my office door. I looked up to find Tanya and Luis, 2 of Whitmore's strongest closers, standing there with their resignation papers still in their hands. You left, Tanya said, and everything fell apart. Luis nodded. Inventory is a mess. Brandon keeps calling vendors we never worked with. Nobody can find anything. He yelled at a junior tech for asking where the keys were. They both asked if we were hiring. Marco hired them before the hour was over. That night, I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. 1 column for clients who had followed me, 1 for vendors, 1 for staff, another for estimated revenue shifted away from Whitmore. I wasn't tracking out of spite. I was tracking reality proof of what actually held that company together. Every name I typed made the picture clearer. Whitmore Automotive hadn't just fired an employee. They had removed the structure holding their house upright, and the cracks were already spreading. 2 weeks into my new role at Rivas Auto Group, an email slid into my inbox with a subject line that stopped me cold. Private inquiry, temporary consulting request. It was from Mara, Whitmore Automotive's human resources chief. The body of the message was short. A few weeks of guidance. No public statement required. Flexible rate. Not a single acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a quiet attempt to patch the holes now flooding their ship. I didn't reply. By the next morning, the calls began. Not to me directly. Marco forwarded them with raised eyebrows. Decker, the import vendor, reported unusual confusion on Whitmore's end. A finance partner mentioned that quarterly projections looked inconsistent. A bank representative left a message asking if I had insight into the sudden drop in numbers. I hadn't worked there in days, but the consequences of pushing me out were landing faster than they could hide them. That afternoon, my cell phone lit up. Brandon Whitmore. I let it ring until it almost stopped, then answered. His voice came through thin, stretched tight. Rachel, thank you for picking up. I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. Look, I will be honest. Things have been challenging. There have been issues with vendors, and the banks are asking questions. The team is overwhelmed. I think we both know the last few weeks have not gone smoothly. Still, I said nothing. He rushed on. Maybe we acted too fast. Maybe we misread the situation. I'm willing to make this right. Come back. We can redo your title Senior Vice President, or even Executive Director, higher salary, full control of operations, whatever you need to stabilize things. Brandon, I said quietly, you fired me in front of an attorney, called me rigid, and told me not to bother coming in. He inhaled sharply. That was a mistake. No, I said. It was a decision. Silence. You don't get to ask me to return now. Before he could answer, I ended the call. The phone felt warm in my hand. Not from anger, something steadier. Something that no longer shook under someone else's power. I set it down and went back to work. The days that followed moved with a rhythm I had not felt in years. Instead of dodging egos and smoothing over reckless decisions, I was building something clean, something that finally made sense. I sat with Marco and his department heads every morning, laying out the structure Whitmore had always resisted. Data first. I told them, gut instinct comes after the numbers. Not before. No one argued. No one rolled their eyes. They listened, asked questions, and actually wrote things down. We rebuilt the vendor chain from scratch. Decker helped us streamline imports. The detailing team adjusted turnaround windows. Our parts supplier began offering better terms because, as he put it, you actually track what you order. I trained the new hires myself. Tanya and Luis absorbed everything faster than I expected. "This makes sense," Tanya said one afternoon while reviewing the workflow. "It's like you removed the chaos." "The chaos was never necessary," I replied. By the end of the second month, I launched a loyalty program designed for repeat luxury buyers' quarterly check-ins, early access to specialty models, pre-approved trade evaluations. The team hesitated at first, unsure if customers would respond. Then, the first list of orders rolled in so fast that Marco walked into my office laughing. 30%, he said, holding up the revenue sheet. "We are up 30% in 90 days. I nodded, feeling something warm settle in my chest. Not pride, not revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of work done right. In early spring, an invitation landed on my desk. The Austin Auto Leadership Summit wanted me to speak on operational restructuring. I accepted. The room was full when I stepped onto the stage. Managers, owners, analysts' faces I'd seen for years, some from companies that had once dismissed me, some who had only heard rumors. I didn't use slides. I spoke from the truth. When a woman in operations pushes back, I said, she is called rigid, difficult, old school. But the truth is simpler. Sometimes we are the only ones protecting a business from people who do not understand how it runs. The room went silent. A different kind of silence, listening, not judging. 1 year after the morning they tried to erase me, I stood behind a curtain at the Women in Auto Leadership Summit. The crowd outside was larger than I expected. Rows of women from dealerships across Texas, some veteran managers, some barely out of college, all waiting for a story they already knew pieces of. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause felt warm rather than loud. I spoke the way I wished someone had spoken to me years ago, about structure, about boundaries, about the cost of telling the truth in rooms that reward obedience over competence. And I told them the part I once kept quiet. I was called stubborn. I said, hard to work with, old school, negative, all because I refused to sign off on decisions that would have destroyed the business. If that is stubbornness, then I am proud of it. After the session ended, women lined up to speak, but one stayed behind after the rest filtered out. She couldn't have been older than 24. She held her conference badge between her fingers like it weighed something. "They call me hard to work with," she said softly, "because I ask questions." I reached into my bag and pulled out a card. "Then keep asking," I told her. "Stay stubborn for the right things." Her shoulders eased, and she slipped the card into her pocket like it was something worth protecting. A notification buzzed on my phone as I walked backstage. It was an industry news alert. The headline was blunt. Whitmore Automotive closes 2 locations as board removes Brandon Whitmore from leadership. A second alert followed banks freezing expansion credit, citing operational instability. Vendors were quoted in the article too, saying they preferred teams who understood Rachel Whitmore's systems. Marco's voice echoed behind me. "You built something they tried to deny, and now everyone sees it." I closed the notification and let the moment settle. Brandon had tried to scare me into silence. He had tried to shrink me down to a caricature so he could feel bigger. But it was his own decisions, his pride, his shortcuts that turned him into the cautionary tale. I stepped back onto the conference floor, surrounded by women who were ready to lead, and I moved toward them without looking back.